so if your eternity hinges on what you do or don't do, and you have no idea how good is good enough, I mean, that's like signing up to run a race and you get to the starting line and you're like, all right, how far is this race? I don't know. I mean, we talking like 5K, 10K, marathon, anywhere, I have no idea. All right, has anybody marked out the race for us? Nope. Okay, where's the finish line? There is no finish line. On your mark, it said go. Everybody takes off running in different directions. That's exactly what the idea that good people go to heaven is like. Nobody knows, how good is good enough. Nobody knows what good even is, and there's no marker, no finish line that lets you know that you have reached your destination. And yet this is the most popular view of heaven in America. And it's popular because most people haven't given it much thought. The more you think about this, the more you see all the flaws and all the holes in this ideology. And not only is it wrong, but Jesus actually taught the opposite of this. When Jesus was on the earth, there was a group of people called the Pharisees. And whenever we read about the Pharisees in the Gospels, they're like, the bad people, But you have to understand, in that day, that culture, Pharisees were esteemed. They were looked up to. These were professional good people. Pharisees were people who dedicated their lives to obeying all of God's commands. In fact, they were so dedicated to obeying God's commands that they created thousands of other laws so that they wouldn't even get close to breaking any of God's laws. So if there was a law that said, don't work on the Sabbath, they would create all these other rules, like you can't walk more than a mile. If you pull your chair out and you create dust on the floor, that's the same thing as harvesting, and so you can't pull a chair out from your table. And they created all these rules so that they would never even get close to breaking God's actual command. That's how committed these people were to doing the right thing. And then Jesus shows up on the scene, and he says, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And people are shocked. They're like, Jesus, if the professional good people aren't good enough, nobody's good enough. And Jesus said, yes, now you're starting to get it. Nobody is good enough to enter the kingdom of heaven because good people don't go to heaven. Forgiven people go to heaven. This is the message of Christianity. It's not good people, it's forgiven people. In Luke 23, Jesus was being crucified, and it says 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. Now, we know that these were some bad guys because they were being executed by the Romans. The Romans wanted as much slave labor as they possibly could. And so if they were crucifying you, that meant you had done something really bad. You were too dangerous to be a slave, and so they have to execute you. So if you'd done something really bad, you were considered to be beyond reform, they would execute you. So these were some bad guys. And it says that one of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at Jesus. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. So one criminal is hurling insults at him to the very end, and the other guy says, hey, this guy is being punished unjustly, but we're getting what our deeds deserve. Our punishment is just. Look, crucifixion was the most painful, agonizing, humiliating way to put someone to death. And this man said, our punishment is just. We are getting what our deeds deserve. This man had to have done some pretty terrible things to deserve crucifixion. Verse 42, then the criminal said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, what opportunity did this man what opportunity did he have to do any good deeds from this point forward? None. In case you didn't know, he had a nail in one hand, a nail in another, and then a nail going through his feet. He had no opportunity to perform any good deeds. What deeds characterized his life up to this point? Really bad ones. enough, is so bad that he thought he deserved crucifixion. And yet Jesus said to this man, today you will be with me in paradise. And with that one statement, Jesus was letting everybody know that it's not good people who go to heaven. It's people who put their faith and trust in Jesus and what he did for them. This was what makes Christianity different from every other religion in the world. Because every religion has a concept of heaven. Every religion has a list of rules that you're supposed to keep. And the basic premise behind every other major religion in the world is that as long as you keep the rules, you're in. If you don't keep the rules, you're out. That is every religion boiled down to a nutshell. But Christianity is different because it has nothing to do with how good or bad you are. It has nothing to do with your behavior. Christianity is the only religion in the world that says nobody is good enough. The only way to get in is to put your faith in Jesus and what he did on the cross by paying for your sins, being buried, and rising from the grave so that you can be forgiven and so that you can have a relationship with God. And when you think about it, it really is the fairest system in the world because everyone is welcome. It doesn't matter how good or bad you've been up to this point in your life, everyone is welcome and everyone can meet the standard, which is faith in God. Timothy Paul Jones is an author, and he wrote in one of his books about his middle daughter. She was previously adopted by another family, but for whatever reason, the previous family, they weren't able to integrate her into the family with the rest of their biological children. So a couple years after adopting her, they ended up dissolving the adoption. And that's when Timothy Jones welcomed this 8-year-old girl into his family. And so in talking with the girl, they found out that anytime her previous family went on vacation to Disney World, they would take their biological kids and they would leave her with a friend. And so growing up, she'd heard all about the Magic Kingdom. She'd heard about the rides and the characters and the parades and all these things. But when it came down to going, she was always left on the outside. And so as soon as Timothy heard about this, he did what any loving father would do. He immediately booked a trip to Disney for the family. What he didn't expect, though, was that the trip to Disney would bring out the most rebellious, awful behavior he had ever witnessed in this 8-year-old child. In the weeks leading up to the trip to Disney, she lied when it would have been easier to tell the truth. She stole food when a simple request they would have given her a snack. She hurled some of the most mean and cruel statements to her other siblings. And as the weeks got closer, her behavior continued to get worse and worse and worse. And so finally, Timothy sat down to talk with her about her latest act of rebellion. And she says, I know what you're gonna do. You're not gonna let me go to Disney, are you? And suddenly he realized what was happening, that she knew that she couldn't earn her way into the Magic Kingdom by good behavior because she had tried to do that before and it never worked. So she was living in such a way to place herself as far away from the Magic Kingdom as possible. And so Timothy said, is this a trip that we're taking as a family? She said, yes. He said, are you a part of this family? She said, yes. He said, then you're going with us. Doesn't matter what you do, this is a family trip and you're part of this family, and so you're going with us. He writes in his book, I like to say that her behavior got better after that talk, but it didn't. Her choices spiraled out of control at every hotel and rest stop all the way to Florida. Still, they headed to Disney. When they got back to the hotel after a day at Disney, a very different child emerged. Her month-long rebellion had faded. When it was time for bed, I held her and said, how did you like your first trip to Disney World? She said, Daddy, I finally got to go to Disney World, and it wasn't because I was good. It was because I'm yours. It wasn't because I was good. It's because I'm yours. And that is the message of Christianity. That we're not welcomed into the kingdom of heaven based on our goodness, but because When you put your faith and trust in what Jesus did for you on the cross, you are forgiven of all of your sins, and you are welcomed into the family of God. You become a son and daughter of the Most High. And so you are welcomed into the kingdom of heaven, not because of your goodness, but because you belong to Jesus.